This is a seafaring vessel. It's a type of boat that Africans used to use for fishing. As you can see, it is very odd in its placement. Those are not sails, that's a net. The name of this boat is Mgeni, and it's used all over Africa from Luanda, from Angola, in Luanda, in Congo, on the other side in the Zambezi. All the places in Africa are known to have it, including some parts of the Ethiopians. But even the boats with sails located in Africa seem to be very different than those seen all over the world. While those were used in areas where Arab had their influence, the seafaring vessels of places like Angola were not exactly the same. This drawing slash painting is a depiction of Angola. Angola is just south of Congo, the historical site of Congo, not the country. Angola was every bit as sophisticated as Congo and every bit as influential in the history of the Europeans. One of the things that they did along the sea was whale. This type of whaling that gathered oils would eventually influence the Europeans to continue whaling themselves in a much deeper way than they ever did in Europe. These whalers, who were conservative in how many they would catch, made a problem, which suddenly Europeans, especially in the 1800s, decided that they did not have to be conservative about it, and only later would come up with rules of anti whaling after years and years of removing natural animals from the sea. While talking about the Kingdom of Congo, the people used to talk about how fair the rules were to the people. Now, of course, they didn't explain it this way. They said that the rules were soft and that sometimes someone would get a financial penalty for even something as bad as the loss of life on somebody else. This seemed very contradictory to Angola, where even removing a tree without the permission of the leader could get your head basically off of your own body, as depicted in some of the pictures that are shown by the Capuchin monks. And while the system of the Kingdom of Congo was more elective than the system of Angola, it became more and more evident that the system of Angola would not tolerate any type of dissension. And so the Kingdom of Congo was, even though you could say it was a dictatorship in a sense, it had flexibility in it. And of course, it has these smaller principalities, it had these smaller governors who were kind of free in the way they operated, to the point that some governors in smaller places are thought to have had democracy at one point, whereas these did not. It is a beauty to see because, of course, a lot of people do not see the reality of Africa in this way, where there was a king, there were subjects, the subjects had wealth, and the lower subjects than that had wealth. There was a middle class. Everything about the civilization was functioning. Now, obviously, you can see that here they have converted to Christianity, but the road to Christianity in Angola was not easy. On top of that, it wasn't the only religion in the game, the traditional Bantu religion. There was still yet another one, the Khoisan religions. We know that even till this day, Khoisan people still practice their traditional belief, and a lot of it isn't even peppered with Christianity around it. It's pure San Khoi religion. Most people don't even know about it. It was written about in the 1800s. And of course, not all religions in Africa are the same, even if they start from the same origin. Now, to clarify, the Kingdom of Angola had several partners around the world prior to the Portuguese. In fact, there is some evidence that they might have had some contact with Muslims, although this has not been fully confirmed because Angola is on the other side of the world. And if they had contact with Muslims, then they should have had contact with the people of Congo. And that doesn't seem to be the case. Instead, the Kingdom of Congo seems to be, and the Kingdom of Angola seems to have benefited from people who had trade with the Muslims, and they could have started their own wave based on some of these trade systems. What we see is three types of structures located in the Kingdom of Angola. We see stone structures, which I've shown you examples. A lot of these are in circular fashion and they're pretty much gone by now. Others are made of stone, but not in a circular pattern, as they depicted in the Kingdom of Congo with these sort of beehive shapes, which let's go back to those ones so we can go back to this whole graves must be pyramids thing that we've seen all over Africa. But of course, there are houses that are built in the style of the Portuguese, and these houses were built for the local rulers. And so a lot of people in Africa were living in the same type of houses that you would find in Portugal, which we must remind ourselves were built by Africans themselves, a lot of these styles, by both Moors and by other West African people. These depicted here are the tumulus that I'm talking about. These are grave sites, and you can see with the skulls and everything. I mean, no human would live around skulls like this, unless they're weird, of course. But these are graves of people, and they depict, even though they are houses that look like this in the Kingdom of Congo, these depict places where people are buried. And if we take the context of we've seen this in Nubia, we've seen this in West Africa. We've seen this in North Africa. We've seen this in the Kanem Bornu Empire. We've seen this pretty much everywhere. And here again, it's depicted the dead getting more respect than the living. There are people who are alive in this region of the world who are living in straw houses, not because they wanted to, but because there was I mean, as one of the Portuguese people put it, a shortage of architects. And so the people who lived in these much bigger houses were kings, what I would call the middle class at the time, and other people who could afford it. Some would live in half stick, half mud houses. And these houses, again, if you've ever lived in them, very comfortable. You can't tell the difference between a brick house and these type of houses. It's pretty much why some of the mosques in Africa are still built in that way. You cannot tell the difference, except that you have to constantly renovate them, clean them, make sure they don't crumble on you. But that's pretty much the same with any other house except the brick part. Obviously, you need to keep painting, and at the time, of course, they were not using electricity. So any house that is white, as a lot of these houses are, you have to constantly wash the walls because the soot would gather up, and when the soot gathers up, your house looks, it looks damaged. And so what you need to do is you have to remove the soot, meaning you had need people who are employed. You need, obviously, you need bring food in those regions. A lot of these people are living in hilly areas. And so that is the consequence of living at that time. This is Luanda in the 1800s, but Luanda had already developed a city like civilization from as early as Luanda was founded. And it actually was one of the ports where they used to find cowrie shells. And so it was a strategic location. It's actually why the Portuguese targeted it, because they knew if they could find harbor ship in this area, then Luanda would help in the demise of Angola and the Kingdom of Congo. Now remember, in the country of Angola today is where you would find the capital, Mbanza, Congo. During the early days of the kingdoms of Angola and the kingdoms of Congo, even when the Portuguese had arrived, they were not very familiar with the trade routes that people from these regions used. And they were surprised to find that people from Angola could make their way all the way to Ethiopia just for trade, as is written in a report about the Kingdom of Congo. As you can see here, a group of rivers and a group of land traveling areas which were brushed away by the natives made it possible to start from Luanda on the very end, right, the west side of the map, and to travel with these rivers and end up as far as Kilwa in East Africa. These places were thought to be disconnected by the Portuguese for a long time. In fact, they were a secret. And then when the report of Kingdom of Congo came out, these people explored deep and wide and even talked about stone buildings that they found, which were way more impressive than the ones they found in Angola, not understanding in their mind how did these Africans have such connection with one another when they did not travel regularly around Africa. Instead, they cut through. This was also brought up prior by the earliest Portuguese who paid native people to tell them how to get through to from Africa, because that used to be the one of the ways that the Portuguese thought they would go around the Turks, around the Arabs, was to, instead of going to the tip of Africa, which they assumed there was one, but they had never been, no one had ever been that far in Europe or Turkey. They assumed that there must have been one. And so they just saw like, let's just cut through Africa, the parts that aren't Muslim. Unfortunately for them, a large part of the part they wanted to cut into was Muslim. And the lower they went, the less Muslim they were, but they were Muslims all the way to the tip. As we read, the river Bengal, which is a large and navigable for 25 miles, runs into this channel, and together with the river Kwanza, of which we spoke before, forms the island of Luanda. Their waters meeting and depositing sand, and so this island is raised. Farther on flows another and larger river called Dande, which can float vessels of 100 tons, and beyond it the river Lemba, which has no harbor and into which no ships enter. Very near to this river is Ozoni, which flows from the same lake as the Nile and has a port. Next comes the river called Loze, without a port, and another great one with a harbor called Ambris, flowing 4 leagues from the royal city of Congo. Last of all, the river Lelunda, signifying trout fish. It bathes the foot of the mountain on which stands the royal city of Congo, called Otiero by the Portuguese. This river, Lelunda, issuing from the same small lake as the Koanza. These big rivers that connect all the way until they reach the side of the Nile made the Europeans very excited because, of course, they wanted to meet Prester John. Reminder that Prester John was not a real person, but they thought was a real person located in Ethiopia. And these rivers seemed to be a much easier way to get there than to travel around the coast of Africa and landing God knows where. They had no idea where they were going. As we read, those we now see lie almost in a direct line, north and forth and south, and nearly 400 miles apart. Some of those countries think that the Nile, issuing from the first lake, flows underground and then reappears. Others deny this, but Lopez asserts as a reliable fact that the Nile does not flow underground, but running through desert and lonely valleys without inhabitants and having no settled channels, is therefore said to flow underground. The Nile certainly flows from the first lake, which lies in latitude 12 degrees south, and is like a shell and surrounded by very lofty mountains, the largest of which, called Cassets, are on the east, and on both sides are mountains, producing saltpetres and silver. The Nile flows thence 400 miles due north and enters another very large lake, which miles due north and enters another very large lake, which the natives call the sea. It is larger than the first, for it is 220 miles across and lies under the equatorial line. Regarding the second lake, very certain information is given by the Anziki near Congo, who trade in those parts, and say there are people who sail on the lake in large ships, and who write and use weights and measures, which as they have not in Congo, and that their houses were built of stone and lime, and their customs resemble those of the Portuguese. Hence it might be supposed the empire of Prester John was not far off. From this second lake, the Nile flows to the island of Meroe, a distance of 700 miles. Other rivers running into it, the principal of which is the river Coles, so called because it issues from a lake of that name on the borders of Melinde. When the Nile reaches Meroe, it divides into two branches and encompasses a highland called Meroe, to the right of which on the east is the river named Abagni, which rises in the lake Bracnia and traverses the empire of Prester John till it reaches the aforesaid island. On the western side flows other rivers, one of which is the Sarabo. Unaware fully of the intentions of the Portuguese, these people gave away their shipping routes around Africa, through Africa, above Africa, and as you can see, the people of Angola and Congo were not opposed to traveling far and wide for trade, traveling as far as Egypt in some cases. It would be impossible at this time to find information from Egypt specifically depicting people from Angola or Congo, as they were themselves unaware of these places. This is a chart drawn up by Jan van Guelen, who made these charts based on Portuguese information traveling from the Americas to this area and local information on how to travel around Africa. He's from the 17th century and, of course, the 18th century because he didn't die until then. And this type of knowledge is invaluable. And remember, we still have words that traveled from Angola to the Americas that had to do with ships, that had to do with culture, that had to do with trade. These people did not play a small part of the history of places like Brazil. They, in fact, played a larger role. I had a video, which for some reason people didn't watch, that has to do with how many words from Angola made it into the Brazilian language, which is actually a significant amount. Anyway, there are several charts that would be drawn up year and year after this in order to make it easier for the Portuguese to travel using local information, stuff they had no idea about. And of course, we have Enrique the Navigator, who was the first person to take this type of travel seriously. And he was smart enough to tell the people who are going to navigate for him, because he never navigated nothing. He was smart enough to tell them, use local information, find out their paths. One of the people, Zarura, was told, follow the palm trees by the native Africans. A piece of information which would prove invaluable. And the people in that region used that knowledge to put up giant pillars, giant crosses as a sign like the palm trees. So it can be like, okay, we're here, we're here, we're here. Because Africa is very treacherous, the coasts. You will find yourself passing by an area thinking that you're close, but nope, you've already passed it. And so when these people figured out that if you follow the palm trees, since palm trees were all over the coast, you will make your way back and you will understand exactly where you are. This final route of travel makes us understand that West Africans must have known how to get to the Cape of Good Hope, where the Portuguese say there was a king called Matama, a lost king, because we have no idea who that is. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, study, and other things. Thank you.